Okay, so let's call the committee to hold order. We're on October 14th, I can believe it's already October 14th. We were expecting Inspector Walton, but I don't see him at the moment, so we'll move right on to Mr. Chambers, and I don't know, is Harold here as well, or is it yourself?
Just myself, Darlene, and Sandra as well.
Okay, great. So maybe if we can just get the podium moved, you can move to the podium there, and you'll have your chance to. I know you just were here mainly to answer any questions, but if you want to make a pitch, go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor and Council. I wasn't really intending to say much today, and I submitted a letter for your consideration. I can give you a bit of an update in terms of the progress we've made since our last time I had a chance to speak with you. Our membership continues to grow. We're now up to 150 members. We've had an excellent outdoor season this year. As you know, the weather was incredible, and so was the pickleball. But we are looking forward to some nets. We're keeping our nets and courts outside of Highland. I've been in communication with Alan, who I see is not here today, regarding the progress of the feasibility report. We submitted our $2,000 to Don in July. I know that in my conversation with Alan, he tells me that he hopes to have the study completed this month, end of the month. And that up to this point, there's been nothing that's come forward that's been problematic. So we've been busy internally raising funds. Have made an application to the federal government to the New Horizons program, and we're optimistic that that will be successful. I understand that the folks in Penticton received a $25,000 grant for their outdoor pickleball courts, so there's been a bit of a precedent set there. So again, our fingers are crossed with that submission. We're here today to ask, I guess maybe for a couple of things, but primarily for a letter of support that indicates that you folks would be able to act as a sponsor for us in an application going forward to the Comox Valley Community Foundation. Those applications are being received till October the 23rd, so we haven't got a heck of a lot of time. And by acting as a sponsor, you would make available to us your registered charity number. I know that Don's been very cooperative with this at this point in time, and several of our members who have made sizable contributions have arranged to have a tax receipt issued to them. And so I'm thinking this is kind of along the same lines as, the funds that would be put forward towards this project would be eligible for a similar tax receipt. So that's my primary reason for being here.
Great. Any questions?
Just one. Steve, I know that Courtney has had pickleballers. I don't know if they're your group or not, coming asking them for the same request as is Cumberland. Are you guys going to all the communities looking for a pickleball court in each community, or is there one concerted effort?
Good question. No, I was asked to make a presentation to the Courtney Recreation Association.
Okay.
Was that earlier this month? I think it was. And our members are a diverse group. We certainly have a portion of our membership would prefer to have outdoor facilities also in Courtney. Some people just don't like crossing bridges. So we have to be sensitive to that portion of our membership that's their preference, would be to play pickleball in Courtney. There's been no presentation made to their city council, and so that would be at the very early stages. Internally as our group, our primary focus is this Highland project, but there is, if the support in the community is there, we would be quite willing to work with any council, any community, any city or town, and help them put those facilities in place if there's a desire wish to do so.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilor Swift.
Thanks, Steve. I know you're working really hard for your group, and I think that's great. I just have a question, and I don't know if you can even answer it, but both New Horizons and the Community Foundation, do they have a timeline for their grants within which their money is needs to be spent?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mark. In the case of the New Horizons, they are looking to have this money spent in 2016. And so it's our hope that that is not problematic. In our initial conversations with you, as I understand how your budgeting processes work, I came to understand back in April or May when we met that nothing was going to be happening in 2015, and I was optimistic that we could make arrangements to secure funding to how this goes forward in 2016. So that's been kind of our conversation going forward. Now, I think everybody understands when we're making these applications that there will need to be funds brought forward to allow the project to go forward, but that's the timeline we've been sort of thinking of.
Any further questions for Steve? Councilor Martin.
Recent conversation with James Holland. He was expressing a lot of enthusiasm about having the pickleball people in the mall. Is that?
Yeah, I left a message. I would have remembered to put that forward. I got the gentleman's card, and I've left a message on his voicemail, and he has not returned my call yet. So the ball's in his court.
That's the way you want to spin it. All right, enough of that. Any further questions? Council will be looking at this issue here momentarily. This is a committee of the whole meeting, as you know, so it would go forward then to a formal council meeting next week for formal approval, but that would still be in time for your 23rd deadline, I believe.
I have a follow-up request, and I don't want to confuse the two. Something that Don and I were speaking of earlier, and that's the possibility of, in terms of fundraising now, and offsetting some of the construction costs, the notion of perhaps having the flexibility to have some naming rights for the facility. And maybe that might, facilitate more funds being brought forward, or some sponsorship in some ways. So I haven't heard back from Don or any other staff members on that point. So if your minds are turned to pickleball, maybe you can throw that in the mix and give that some consideration as well.
Yeah, certainly something that other communities have done. Don't think this council or the town has any specific policy on it. I know it's going to be from time to time. But I think we've gone to things at FCM, UBC, and other communities have done that. So certainly be something we could look at. We'd have to develop policy around that, of course. All right, thank you. And we'll carry on with our next delegation, who is here now. And that is Inspector Walton. Welcome, Inspector. And feel free to present from the podium.
My tardiness does not have to do with the fact this baseball game already.
What's the score?
20 minutes ago. I won't spoil it for anybody.
How do you know?
Spoiler alert. Good afternoon, and I'm back again. Before I get going with the topic at hand today, I'll just give you a brief overview of our mid-year stats, and circulated a copy for everybody. In a nutshell, our overall calls for service and home office are up 5%. Our criminal code offenses are flat. And our impaired driving, liquor, traffic offenses are up as well. A little bit about something that you may have read, Statistics Canada, over the summer. I know that's what you guys do in the summer, is read. 2014 Crime Severity Index was published. Now, the CSI takes into account not only the volume of particular crime, but also the relative seriousness of that crime in comparison to other crimes. It helps answer questions such as, is crime going up? Is it more or less serious than it was before? and has police reported crime in a given city or province more or less serious than other places. So in Canada overall, the CSI is at 66, this is the score. It's down 3% from 2014. BC is up though by 3%. So Comox is down, and I mean way down from the year before. In fact, only Bowen Island has a lower CSI than Comox does, the province of BC, so that's good news. This fall, in fact next month, the detachment will begin a general duty staffing analysis. This process has been around since 1972 when Dr. Richard Larson of MIT published a book entitled Urban Police Patrol Analysis. Again, more summer reading if you guys would be interested. This process will help me determine whether we're properly staffed to mean emergency calls require immediate or quick response. It will also allow us to determine how much time we spend on each call, including getting there, time on scene, follow up with witnesses, and report writing. It will also show us how many man-hours we spend on things such as court and in training. Once we're able to see the results, which will take about 6 months, we work on finding efficiencies from within. This includes such things as changing shifts, stopping some activities altogether, or have them done by other agencies or other town departments. In the past, the number of members in any community was determined by things such as the cost to pop ratio, which measures costs, not workload, reported crime, which ignores non-criminal calls, which we have a lot of, and calls for service, but that ignores the time on each particular call. The staffing analysis is used along with the crime severity index, the number of files per member, the crime rates, to assist in establishing the general duty members for any given town. This includes routine and emergency calls, as well as discretionary patrol time. That includes everything from school talks to writing traffic tickets. Where crime rates are generally dropping, investigations are taking longer due to factors beyond control of the police. Beyond control of the police. So that's my general introduction of what's going to come in about 6 months. We'll come back to council and I'll give you an update on where we are in that process. And then for no quick questions on that, we'll go to the topic at hand, the emergency reserve.
Yeah, were there any questions on the report? I know you've got some stats there as well. I was going to ask about the impaired driving. Obviously, there's been quite a bit of increase in the 90-day suspensions. Is that attributed to a trend, or is it better enforcement, or have you guys put more resources into that?
I'd say a bit of both.
Yeah.
It's as the detachment fills up, we have more and more time to spend on things such as traffic. And you're also looking at 90-day suspensions. That usually comes after the more minor suspensions, so people could be at their third strike type of thing.
Right.
And I say that's the last thing short of another criminal code charge. And a lot easier to do, a lot quicker for us to do than actual criminal code charge. We have our guidelines, which way we go.
Okay, thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, Inspector Walton, you and I both sit on the board with the Community Justice Center. And do you find that avenue is beneficial to you to help deter some crime? You know, if there's young offenders, you send them that way, and that it helps them get on the straight and narrow. Is that an impact in our community?
In general, yes.
Yeah.
Every community I've worked in has seen the value of diverting things away from court. A lot of things are diverted pre-charge, so especially with youth, Section 6, Section 9 in the old days. The old waggy finger, stirred talking to, the hairy eyebrow, whatever you want to call it, and deal with it with a warning, bringing the kid back to the parents. That was done many, many moons ago, and it was now made legal or made codified, I guess, under the present act. And then the ones that are post-charge go to community justice. We had an interesting traffic court. I do write tickets, and I do go to traffic court, and the tickets are disputed. Last Friday, we had a young person who was caught with no insurance, and there was some discussion on a fine, whether the fine was appropriate. The judge was quite creative in his thoughts. That doesn't go to CJC, but it's the same principle, same process. Mm-hmm. So somebody works it off rather than have mom pay it and pay back money. So
Yeah.
type of scenario. So yeah, definitely support it.
Restorative justice. Thanks.
Okay, Councilor McKinney.
It's a question for you, Your Worship. When you were away and I was replacing you, we tabled some questions for the inspector in regards to...
Jake is going to speak to that in a moment, so if there's any other questions
No.
from...
No,
Okay.
sorry.
On the report.
So I think he's going to cover that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Emergency reserve. As mentioned in your report from Don's request, police usually run a surplus annually, barring any major crimes or events. This is due mostly to the fact that costs of policing are wages. We can hire reservists to fill some short-term vacancies, but there's always a gap that goes unfilled, and this results in a surplus. This year, the Valley has seen more costly investigations, some costly investigations, such as a criminal hit and run, a murder, and most recently an international parental abduction. Well, these events are not common. They will continue to occur, and we will require many other investigators and other detachments and sections to allow us to pursue some specialized policing techniques, such as undercover operations, interception of private communications, and that's wiretaps for you Dick Tracy fans, and also things like witness protection. Considering the relatively small number of members that the town of Comox funds, which is 11.6, it easily double the number of people working on a particular file, on a major file. I did some checking, and in a basic, you can call it a basic homicide investigation, a non-complicated one will be about $100,000 easily, and some of the very complex ones will approach $1 million. So that's usually spread out over more than 1 year, but we could certainly spend $100,000 in a year. Basic. So, to cut to the bottom line, I believe that establishing a reserve fund would provide a financial cushion for the taxpayers, and I'm one of them, in the town of Comox for these rare events.
Okay, and I know Councilor had some questions about that, so Councilor McKinnon, did you want to follow up with a question?
I'll open to the other councillors that brought concerns up, or questions at the previous council meeting.
Councilor Price and Arnott?
Yes, I personally was surprised to hear that leasing costs can vary if there is a much more demanding, intense case. And so I've never come across that before, and I assume that given that we're a blended force with the rural areas and the municipalities, that we paid our share, we had a blended force, and you put the officers where they were most needed, and we landed that we have this amount, and if there's any left over, we get it back. So it was a surprise to hear that there could be additional costs, and so is this something new? Is this a new, or it's just never been charged before?
No,
Since it's happened in the past.
it's always been there. Knock on wood, we haven't had those major occurrences. I mean, the ultimate investigation, I suppose, would be Picton. My understanding was the province came in even to help a municipality as large as Coquitlam. But the payment of people, when we bring in other investigators from Victoria, especially sections from Victoria or Surrey, they come with expenses and overtime, and that's all charged back to the municipality where the offense occurred. So you could get every one of the staff at the detachment handling something that happens in Comox right now. That doesn't cost you anything, even though you're only paying for whatever, 3 people or 2 people on the road right now. But when we start bringing in people on overtime, bringing people from other communities, that's when the cost goes directly to the municipality. One municipality is not paying yet. It's Cumberland. We had about a $10,000 bill for one of their events this summer. That, again, they are under the provincial umbrella, so we can't cost that back to the municipality because they don't pay directly. But if that was Courtenay or Comox, that would be one of those things that I'd be looking to charge back to the community. So that means that that's $10,000, 2 days. And it's an easy expense, so they can see how things run out quite quickly.
Which explains probably why when we have events like nautical days and stuff, we work closely with the organization to make sure they have proper security here. Keep those costs down, otherwise they could get out of control. I don't know the specifics of Cumberland. Was that an anticipated expense or was unanticipated?
That was anticipated. It was planned. But we didn't have the resources to police that event. But what you're not seeing is year over year is a running surplus, both here and in Courtney every year. So the surplus, I'm going to presume, is by 3/4 of the way through the year, somebody knows roughly what we're going to spend and can reallocate that surplus to other priorities. My understanding is this proposal here would take some of that anticipated surplus and put it away for the fund. So I guess.
Councillor Arnott, sorry.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was originally wondering about and doing some homework today. So from what I understand is that if we were to spend X number of dollars a year in policing the salaries of the O&M, what hasn't been spent at the end of the year would then come back to the town and put it into a surplus. Is that, am I reading that correctly?
Treasurer of Finance meeting.
So if we were to put $1 million into policing for a year, and then for whatever reason they only spent $800,000, then do they return $200,000 to us that then would go into this reserve?
They don't return something that we haven't spent, right?
We wouldn't.
They
So
send
would we
they send us quarterly bills,
Okay.
and we pay whatever the bill is, right? They do make an adjustment for prior year, mid-year of the next year. Anyway, the bottom line is that at the end of the year, we will have a surplus, hopefully, some of which will come from policing, and we can take the amount that came out of the policing surplus from this year, and we can budget that next spring as a contribution into this reserve. So it would be part of the next year's financial plan, and council would authorize that explicitly. You could decide how much of the police surplus you want to put in.
Okay.
Councillor McKenna.
Question for you, Donald. Has the town ever had a negative, deficit in regards to policing costs?
Yes, sometimes there have been adjustments the other way where they underbilled us and we've been surprised.
Okay, so without having a surplus previously in our budget, adjustments is how we have them?
Right, there's a process whereby the 4 quarterly billings in any fiscal year are adjusted through months later. So we can find out in 2015 suddenly that what we paid in 2014 wasn't enough.
So we've been able to handle it in the past.
Yeah.
The reasons for looking at this step as a possibility is to be fiscally prudent in case of a major cost that might come through a major investigation, a murder or what have you.
Your Worship, that was part of staff's motivation, but as much as anything else, our concern, myself and our administrator, Richard Canagan, our concern was that we wanted, if we levied taxes for a public safety issue like fire or policing, and it was a significant surplus that was consistently happening year after year after year, we personally like to see the resources that were taxed for public safety remain in a public safety spending envelope, rather than perhaps repurposed to something else. You know, public safety is important, and we think that it's of all our services, it's right at the core of what we do, and we'd like to see the money that we raise through taxation for those services stay there.
So if I understand you correctly, instead of making adjustments, if we had any surplus, it would go automatically to a account that would deal with this situation.
Well, no, the RCMP will continue to make annual adjustments to their billings. And what we're proposing is to establish a reserve whereby council, through our annual financial planning process, could authorize a transfer of the surplus that arose from policing into this reserve, which is for policing and more generic public safety issues, including emergencies, policing, public safety emergencies. We've defined it fairly broadly to give us the maximum, to give council the maximum flexibility down the road to spend it as need arises.
Thank you.
Councillor Kingrad.
Yeah, so when we hit the magic 15,000, people in town, which could be the next census or maybe not, but would this money, if we had a surplus, could we use it to help offset some of the new costs?
The reserve is worded in such a way it can be used on policing, emergencies, public safety, operating, and capital costs. So you can use it to help buffer that change. Probably won't be the next census. It'll probably be the census after, but
having a
it's
bit of
coming. Yeah, we know it's coming.
Having a surplus there, because we're going to get a 20% increase minimum. At some point in time, we
It'll
should
be,
have some money set aside.
it'll be about $250,000 per year hit when that change happens, based on our current number of RCP officers.
All right, Councillor Price then, Arno.
I was curious, so with the 10,000 something giving Cumberland, could that be, could the province be asked for that money?
The fund that we spend, the fund that polices Cumberland is actually provincial fund. We're allocated so much of that provincial fund. So as I would with the other two contracts, I knew I was going to be over, or I predicted I was going to be over, I would advise my financial people of what was going on, and they would be up to them to repurpose the money from somewhere else in the provincial budget, because it is part of a bigger pool versus you guys are your own pool of funds.
Really good, thank you. It's fascinating. I didn't see that damage.
There was a recent situation, I think it was the Woonstock Music Festival outside of Penticton, where there was a huge bill outstanding, and again, no municipality, I think it might have been First Nations land, but the festival organizers went bust. And so the province was basically out that money. It was a lot more than $10,000.
200 or something.
I do have a question, but not on the funding and all stuff, but regarding the detachment that you guys are, as the community is getting bigger, you guys are still in the same detachment. I remember a handful of years ago there was talk about moving. Is that still in the books?
It's back in the books. No secret that we've grown out of our present detachment. We've leased space. We being the detachment have leased space over on 19th. There is another building that the RCP occupies at the district level in the valley. And the proposal, as some of you may remember, was to build a big detachment and house all the resources in the one building. That was rejected several years ago, and I'm bringing it back into discussion. My understanding is the mayor of Courtenay had a meeting with senior officials in the Attorney General's office, as well as my commanding officer in Surrey, and discussed that at the UCBM, meetings a few weeks ago. So it comes down to getting the province to pay for the O&M cost, or so the capital costs of their share of the building, and as well as the increased O&M. This new buildings cost more than the present building.
Right.
The other question that has to be answered is whether we propose to relocate all of the employees in the valley, or just the detachment. So those people that fall under my org chart, people that don't, for instance, the Operation Communications Center telecoms, they don't fall under me. They're in my building, but they don't fall under me.
Right. So you could see that the existing building right now stay for the communication, and then the general duties, we call it that, would go to a new building.
That's one option, yes.
Yeah. And the funding for the new building, is it split through Gomox, Courtenay, the province? How do you get the funding for that?
The building itself, I mean, you look in the contract, the municipality's got to provide the space for the police station. This particular community, the province, the town, and the city have all got together and are funding the building. So my understanding is capital costs are shared, unless one of the municipalities wants to go in and fund the whole thing. And then it's a matter of rent, basically, per person per year, so O&M costs. And they would be, my understanding, is a lot higher than what they are now, because our building was built in 1983 and 1985. So a new building would incur new costs, higher costs than we're paying now.
Thank you.
But at this point, to my knowledge, we haven't asked to pay for anything. Checks in the mail.
Our share of accommodation costs is varies a little from year to year, but it's in the $65,000 to $70,000 range per year. So that's our share of the cost of that building.
All right, anything further? Thank you, Inspector Walden. All right, so we have no minutes of meetings or departmental reports. So the next item is in fact on the reserve for policing and emergencies. So this is for information only. And of course, the bylaw is at third reading. So it would come forward for council's adoption and consideration next meeting. So is that any most relevant change?
We don't want to receipt or anything, we're happy.
No, we're good on that. We already received it, so we're good. Report is there, that's for background, and the bylaws there for background. All right, so for the next item, I believe we are at the governance study. This is resulting from a previous delegation that was here from the Chamber of Commerce. So staff are providing information, and if council wishes to respond to the request for a resolution, and otherwise letter to the province. So, yes.
So this came up at the regional district. My understanding is that Cumberland is not in, so if you're trying to do a governance study and one of the communities isn't in, it probably doesn't have a lot of things to do with it. But it was thought that the ministry really didn't want to see political influence in this, that they wanted this to be driven by the public. And so what the RD decided to do was send a letter to the chamber, supporting the chamber, but not to the province. So supporting their effort to get a study to see if it works, but not to send it on to the province. So that's what was determined there.
Okay, thank you for that. Any further comments? Any resolutions that anyone wishes to make? Councilor Kenneth.
Just a comment, there's a target number that the chamber has to receive signatures before this moves forward too. Is that not correct?
5,000.
It's 5,000.
Yeah, and just for background, this stems from a UBCM, the last time it was in Victoria, which was 3 or 4 years ago now, where they representatives met with then Minister Bennett, I think it was. He was said, well, if you get 5,000 signatures representing roughly 10% of the electorate in the valley, then come talk to us. So they've been working away at that ever since.
My question, I'm not speaking for or against the intentions of the governance review. Shouldn't we be discussing this after the 5,000 signatures have been received, or is this premature to discuss it now? Again,
That's, I think, in line with what Councillor Kengan was saying, that the regional district felt that this is the Chamber's initiative, shouldn't be unduly politicized, I suppose, and if they, support them in getting 5,000 signatures, I guess, to keep them going. But ultimately, I think they've kind of gotten to a point where they feel that they've kind of done enough, but I don't know. That's a question of interpretation, I suppose. You'd have to ask Andrew Gower or Diane Hawkins.
They've got close to 3,000 signatures, so they're close.
the end line or deadline for?
I don't believe there is a deadline. I think it's open-ended.
Yeah, to some extent, I guess, if it goes on for 2 more years or whatever it takes, then they're going to look at this somewhat questionably. But ultimately, it's a province-led initiative. Restructure studies generally are. And my own personal perspective is if we're going to ask the province for anything right now, we should be asking for support, and whether it's water or sewer infrastructure funding. Governance is always going to be an issue, but I'd rather see the money going to actual infrastructure. That's just me. All right, so yes.
So just so I'm clear, Cumberland is not supporting this initiative, or?
That's correct.
That was my understanding.
Yeah, I was reported on the paper, so it must be true.
Yeah. Which paper though?
I won't tell you the score in the Blue Jays game.
So,
I noticed that in the last overview, Cumberland wasn't included in that one either.
That's true. Yeah, the study at that time was a core area amalgamation between Courtney, Comox, and some of the electoral areas, and Cumberland was which is not, I don't think they wanted to be part of this study. So unless there's anything coming forward, we just move on and see where they get to. All right, so moving on to open burning on large lots. So we do have the fire chief here and staff recommendation. Certainly the memo is on the agenda there from the fire chief, and he's here to answer any questions. And council may wish to provide direction based on that report or otherwise. Fire chief, do you want to add anything further to your report?
I think this, memo is fairly self-explanatory. It's obviously a vast issue.
Okay. Councilor Gingras.
Yeah, so when we first enacted this bylaw way back when, the thoughts in the fire chief's recommendations were pretty much the ones that I had. I think that in some cases we're fairly onerous with some property owners. I like his idea of 3 acres, and all of his recommendations he's got here actually I think would be good. 6 and 7 of course don't apply, but I would make a motion that we amend our burning bylaw to include the recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8.
Okay, so direct staff to bring back the bylaw
Yes.
to that effect? Or bylaw amendment?
Yes.
All right, seconder for that?
I'll second.
Okay, discussion. Councilor?
I have a concern regarding this. First of all, recognizing that the original bylaw was put in place with the quality of air being the issue. And secondly, that this now has come to the table as a result of 2 farmers in the valley requesting burning
Farmers in
permits.
Comox.
In the valley, pardon me, in Comox, yes, sorry. And so with that, both thoughts in mind, I felt that, one, because the Comox Valley is in fact a farming community, and 2, here we are in Comox with 2 farms that are obviously needing some assistance, and it would be great if we as a town would in fact support our farming community, but at the same time, of course, keeping the quality of air issue in the foreground. Thinking that perhaps there could be a compromise in this regard. One, that burning be allowed for the 2 farms, but in addition to that burning permit, there would be the stipulation that any farm in the town that is 10 acres or more could qualify for a burning permit, providing they were of farm status, and of course under the ALR, so that it was this burning was in fact concentrated just on the farms in town.
So you're suggesting it shouldn't necessarily be the 3-acre parcel? It should be
No, I feel it should be concentrated just on the farm community.
Our planner is here. I don't know how many farms we have, of what sizes in town. Do you know?
We have quite a few on the map behind you, the zoning map. The green up in the Knight Richard area is the primary area of ALR land in the town in terms of farming.
Well, perhaps I could also add productive farms. I think that's probably the issue as well.
Well, farm status would help in that regard, I suppose. So you're suggesting an amendment to the criteria. So, okay, we'll take that as an amendment. Did you get that? Is there a seconder for the amendment?
Second.
Okay, so on the amendment,
Okay, so on the amendment, I guess,
related to number 8.
yes, in my haste to do this, I realized when I was just reading this that under the zoning it calls for single family, and I didn't mean to just not include those 2 farms in my original thoughts. And the way this is, I don't know whether those would be considered residential or not. Or would they be considered farm? Because the fire chief's recommendation says residential properties. And my intent was to include those, of course.
Sorry, I'm not understanding which
Well,
properties you're talking about?
there's 2 farms that Mark talks about.
The 2 that apply.
Yes.
But
And
there's other
so,
farms as well.
and so in this zoning, when Gord brings his recommendation, it says zoning that if approved would allow only to be given property zones residential single-family homes.
If I may speak to that.
Yes, please.
Mayor, it's just, the thought was to avoid the grid properties, more or less. So people like the bark mulch store, we wouldn't want them to be able to have a fire.
Yeah.
If that's what council desires, obviously that would be an industrial nature and commercial nature. So that's what I was trying to avoid, but the wording will be complicated as to whether it's single family or farming. And
Well, we do have an AG 1.1 zone, right?
Yes, and that is the ALR lands. That's also includes not only the ALR land of course, because the two farms are the two farms that have petitioned council, so it's that right there.
So that got confusing.
So we could amend both the zoning to reflect AG 1.1 lands, which always covers what you're referring to. Some of those may be more or less than 10 acres, I have no idea, but if we limited it to those lands, would that be sufficient? Or are you thinking there's other concerns? And then nowhere else in the town, regardless of size, it would just be those zone lands?
What, I'm sorry, but I don't know the size of the other farms. I thought there were just the 2 farms within the town that were actually farm status and productive.
Oh, I see, so you want the farm status side of it. I don't know the answer for that. Mr. Planner, do you have any information on that?
No, in regards to the farm status,
Okay, so there's 2 issues. One is the lands, what type of lands. The second is
The size.
what they're using them for. So do you have anything further on the amendment?
I heard 10 acres mentioned, and I guess my question would be, I'll defer to the fire chief. Can you enlighten council as to the air quality problems of allowing burning on smaller properties that aren't farms? We're lay people, and
Yeah, I think
defer
that's
to the fire
fairly
chief.
obvious. The closer the houses are, the more likely there will be complaints of the smoke. So larger properties would have less likelihood of complaints on them, you would think. You know, that's one reason why we don't have fires in downtown Comox. 70-foot wide lots, your neighbors are certainly going to know really quick if you're having a fire. 3 acre, 5 acre, 10 acre, 20 acre, the bigger the better in terms of being able to have that smoke dissipate, I guess, quicker.
So I'm hearing you say you'd have reservations. Or is that?
Well, I guess the question is, what are we trying to address here? We're trying to address some farmers that want to burn stuff because it's cheaper, obviously, than disposing of it. There's going to be a whole host of issues around that, of course, in terms of air quality. And then it's the size of the properties that are in the farming area that might be relevant, or what they're being used for. So there's all sorts of issues. I know this was discussed when we did bring the line, and we said, look, no burning within the town of Comox, people can find other ways of dealing with it. Of course, we do have curbside pickup, and farmers can presumably do similar things with whatever they have. Burning it is obviously one way to go, but it's perhaps good for the environment and health of our citizens. Councillor Price.
Yes, so I understand that the amendment that we've got on the table is the 10 acre, and it speaks to agricultural land, I guess based on a suggestion of whether it's got farm status, I guess is a measure of it. So yes, I can support that. I think it is a big can of worms, and it's been opened, partially opened once, and then a lot of people came in and said, well, can't we, when we were looking, or I was on council, when council was looking at Point Homes having the right to burn, then people within the town on larger lots, myself, I have 2 acres, my neighbour has 3 acres, actually looks at Area B but has Comox behind, so according to one of those definitions would be eligible to burn. And I think what's happened over time, although it's very convenient, and certainly we've used it in the past, is that when you say no burning, you develop other ways to deal with the situation. And as the years have gone by, people, even if sometimes it's been inconvenient, it's the norm. So once you open that door, you are opening a smoky door. And I think the more we can keep it a small area, I think the better. I just had a question too of the fire chief. In your report you speak to that you've responded to illegal burning complaints. So I assume that the neighbourhood has notified you that fires are going on. So it makes worthy that they were really large, because it sounds like it's a situation almost where the neighbourhood are going, we don't want to see this happening. And
in some cases, so if I can speak to that, we get complaints all year round from inside the town and outside the town, more likely outside the town in the rural areas where people are allowed to burn certain months of the year. But we do have them downtown Comox, even if people have the fire in their backyard, and we'll respond to those complaints and have the people put those fires out. The properties we're talking about, interestingly enough, we were at one of those properties on the night of August 28th during the drought for a 10 o'clock fire call that came in as a forest fire. We sent 2 fire trucks, 12 firefighters there. One of these residents was burning yard waste and construction material. And we've been to that same property probably 4 or 5 times in the last 4 years, maybe once a year for burn complaints. So this resident knows the rules and chose during the height of the drought to have a fairly large fire. In fact, he assisted us putting the fire out with his Bobcat and got coat. August 28th. So yes, and this was called in by a neighbor. A neighbor looked across the fence and seen the fire in the bush and called fire department, called 911. So we respond as an emergency. And, a lot of the complaints come in as non-emergency. Somebody will phone and say, my neighbors, we burn in their backyard, it's a wrong time of year, it's a wrong product, it's annoying us. We would respond to close to 150, 200 burning complaints a year.
So in some ways, could you see that this is an advantage if there's 1 week and the person has to come in for a permit, and then through the permit it can specify the size, setback?
If the person chooses to follow those rules,
Okay.
it could help. The other thing, if we do move forward with the rewrite of the bylaw, I would suggest that we might want to increase the fines and the mechanisms to position those fines, just so the enforcement side of it is a little bit stronger. And that may help too.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I still like the 3 acre thing. I remember when we first did this, there was a few people that have 3 acre parcels, not very many right in our downtown area, like in the town proper, I call it, not including the Point Homes area, that really found this to be an onerous bylaw and very difficult for them to get their, you can't take it to the curbside. We really leave them with very little alternatives here except a big cost and a lot of effort, and really for the few properties that we're talking about that are 3 acres and over, I really don't see it being a whole lot worse for air quality than what wood stoves would burn in the wintertime anyway. So I would like to see this stay at the 3 acre parcel size. I think that it's just, I don't think it's going to really cause a great deal of difference to the air quality, but we're really going to make some people's lives a lot easier. So I just think we were too onerous when we first started this, and we should go back to that.
Any further speakers then on the amendment?
Well, regarding the 3 acres, if I may, how many lots do we have to the planner that are 3 acres or more in the town? Like outside of farms and stuff. There's a couple off of Pritchard, maybe.
Yeah, I really would this time.
There'd be scattered around, in different parts of the community. I mean, you can see the map. I don't know how big the 3 acres is on that map, but there'd be a few more in the town. Perhaps up on Butchers, there might be 1 or 2, and so on and so forth. I suppose the amendment is trying to focus it on the farming area, if you will. The farmers have written a request, and the farming activity up there is a lot different, and of course perhaps ever more onerous to deal with some of their material, although presumably they would compost and do other things on a larger scale than residents would. And I know this has been debated at length before in terms of that parcel size. My concern would be you would then see a parcel here, a parcel there, a parcel over there, and if they're all burning, then you'll see on a fall day, with the weather patterns we get, poor air quality. In fact, it was not that long ago, a couple Saturdays ago, when I noticed something burning around here. I don't know who it was, but it might have been in the rural areas, might not have been, but it's very noticeable. So, on the amendment, any further discussion? Yes.
Thanks, it's been a good discussion here, and some good points raised. Is that Councillor Mark Grant's initial proposal, I think, was to support farmers and lands that are on the ALR jurisdiction, 10 acres and productive farms. And I don't see a problem with doing that. If we do that, could it be something that we could review after a year and see how that is happening and how they're following through with regulations? And the rider I would put is that there be follow-up regulations and enforcement for any kind of problems that arise because people aren't following regulations. So that would be where I'd be prepared to stand that, to support that, 10 acres in the ALR, productive farms.
Okay, so you're in support of the amendment. Anything further on the amendments? So, all those in favor of the amendment is, we've got it. Does anyone want to read it back first? We've got it all. To be clear, we should read it.
Yeah, to be clear, if we could go back to the original motion I have, for the original motion that burning bylaw be amended to incorporate recommendations. Perhaps Ken can confirm
1, 3, 4, 5,
5, and 8.
Yes, it's because the other ones were about complaints and alternatives, so they did good.
Okay. And then the amendment would be that burning be allowed for the farms 10 acres or more with farm status in the ALR. So recommended number 8 would be
That's reflect your amendment, I believe it does. That's what we're speaking to. Okay, so everyone clear on that? So that would amend by virtue of that point 8 and point 1, which would be the zoning and also the size. All right, so on the amendment, all those in favor?
I'm opposed.
You're opposed. One opposed? Two. Okay. So the amendment passes on the main motion as amended. You ready for the question? All those in favor? Any opposed? I don't think. Are you still opposed?
Well, no, I mean, might as
Opposed to the amendment.
well get a little bit. I'm opposed to the amendment.
Take a turn. Well, we'll bring it back for further discussion with the bylaw. So the motion passes. Staff will bring that back to us as reasonably quickly as possible, although it might not be for a couple weeks out of that.
And I think was one, if I may be wrong, one of the recommendations was that this be set for the spring.
Yeah, we got till
period,
April
so
1st.
Okay, so we
a
got,
little bit of time.
okay.
Cut till April 1st.
So it's not as much of a burning issue. I know you're going to say it.
I was waiting for it.
April 1st when we do it.
That's right. Okay, I think the last item then on the agenda is the pickleball. Yes. So, they're seeking a letter of support. Does council wish to provide same?
Well, I would move we give them a letter of support. One question, are we allowed to have them use our status number?
For the grant application for the Community Foundation?
Can we do that?
Mr. Finance, hopefully can tell.
Or is there a problem?
So, the reason that they need a sponsor is that a foundation that's registered, that has charitable status and is registered with Canada Revenue Agency, can only give its money to another charitable foundation or an organization that can issue tax receipts. That would include registered charities, municipalities, the province or the federal government. So the community foundation has to give their money to a qualified donee. And in the past, on 1 or 2 occasions, roughly 10 years ago, council agreed to sponsor another organization. So what happens, because we can issue, we're not a registered charity, but we are the equivalent of a registered charity. We're a qualified donee under the Income Tax Act. The community foundation can give money to us, and then we can cut a check onward to whatever organization they want us to fund. It meets the requirements of that Canada Revenue Agency has put in place, and it's a fairly normal practice, not just in Comox, but elsewhere. Wherever the money's going to be spent, the organizations that aren't already registered charities will generally turn to the municipality and say, hey, will you assist us in this transaction?
Okay.
So there's been a precedent here and elsewhere.
Yes.
Okay. All right, any further discussion? Move the second? Yes.
I don't have any problem with supporting this. I just have a concern or question, I guess, regarding if their grants are successful and they need to spend it within a certain time frame, are we then locked into finding our portion of the funds to,
Director Fine?
because we don't know how much it is either.
No, we don't.
I do not know with any certainty what the arrangements at the Community Foundation are, but there is no requirement that they have for fiscal year financing. They have fiscal year financial reporting, but as far as I know, they can spend their money whenever they choose. They may administratively have policies that say, look, if we give you a grant, we want it spent in a certain amount of time. But it's kind of different from a federal grant or a provincial grant, which usually have very firm spending requirements. You cannot start spending the money before a certain date, and you must spend it all by another date or you give it back. I would imagine there's much more flexibility at the Community Foundation.
Yeah, and typically their grants have gone to the various ceremonies that perhaps other members of council have. I mean, there were 2,000 here, 3,000 there, 2,000 there, so it does seem somewhat flexible, and the organizations are using it for all sorts of different reasons. They might get a grant, say, to buy nets or a facility to store the nets and that kind of thing. I don't know exactly what they're asking for, so we'll see what happens.
But my understanding was, I guess in conversations with Al, that this pickleball court could be fairly expensive, and I'm just concerned that
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll be able to raise the funds in a timely manner and so on. So I don't know if we're getting locked in.
Well, the worst case scenario is the organization would have to give the money back to the foundation if they can't spend it. Yeah, so we'll have to, you're right, it's still feasibility studies, all sorts of things, so we don't know. We'll see what they, if they do get any money from other organizations like Horizons, that they might, and it is difficult, it's sort of chicken and egg, right? You have to have money to do something. And
I agree, and I support their efforts, but...
Just want to get ourselves in a pickle.
Yeah, okay, exactly.
Okay, Councilor McKinnon.
One last question, if I may, and it's appropriate to ask our Recreation Director a question in this regard. And I appreciate the efforts of this group to try and partner and look at funding. If they were successful in getting funding, and following up on Councillor Swift's question about the cost of this, is this a priority that the Recreation Department would want supported? If you don't feel appropriate answering that, I apologize, but
Answer it anyway. Now you're in
are there other priorities that are more important than this, and should you
Speaking
take
for the
a
Recreation
step back?
Department, and again, this is Alex Fraser's project with pickleball. We are behind it, absolutely.
Okay. All right, anything further? All those in favor of the letter then? Motion's carried. All right, so I believe that brings us to the conclusion of the committee of the whole. We do have an in-camera meeting that follows, so motion to adjourn.
Move.
Second. In favor? Motion to adjourn. So we'll get back here momentarily for the